Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenbrook, and in today's podcast I'll be looking over the game against Burnley by bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you interviews with Roy Hodgson, Andros Townsend, James McArthur and Max Meyer after the game. So let's begin. Palace finally ended their long wait for a home win against Burnley, and they claimed the 3 points in style as goals from James McArthur and Andros Townsend secured an important win. The result doesn't quite tell the whole story after what was a dominant display by Roy Hodgson's team, who allowed their opponents 2 attempts all game whilst peppering Joe Hart's goal throughout, but they required Lady Luck to shine on them for the breakthrough when McArthur's 16th minute cross found its way into the net. It seemed only a matter of time until the second arrived, but after numerous opportunities were squandered, it took until the 77th minute for Palace to secure their first win in 9, thanks to a sensational long-range strike from Andros Townsend. That ensured that the home fans left Selhurst Park happy for the first time this season, and registered their 100th win in the Premier League and 200th in the top flight. Buoyed by their great display last weekend at Old Trafford, Palace began brightly and attacked their opponents from the off. Just 8 minutes had passed when Max Meyer whipped the ball towards the bottom corner and forced Joe Hart to make an excellent save, and Patrick Van Aanholt came straight at a Burnley shot stopper from range soon after. It was all Hodgson's team in the opening exchanges, and thus when the lead came after 16 minutes, it was warranted even in the bizarre circumstances that saw it netted. McArthur found Townsend with a throw-in who returned it to the Scotsman, and he sent a dangerous cross into the area that eluded both Meyer and the surrounding defenders, clipped the far post and sneaked in behind Hart and into the net. The one-way traffic continued throughout the first half, and Meyer again came close to netting his first Eagles goal when he bent the ball towards the opposite corner but was a whisker wide. And Van Aanholt and Luka Milivojevic saw a pair of thumping volleys deflected wide, as the hosts couldn't quite find the 2-goal cushion they deserved for their first half efforts. They came ever so close to getting it within 90 seconds of the restart when Wilfried Zaha received the ball on the edge of the area, tied Matthew Loughton in knots and fizzed the shot towards the target, but Hart produced a fingertip save to divert it over, and then Zaha blazed over the top when he was fed in by Townsend as all action continued to be contained in the Burnley half. The second half resembled an Eagles shooting practice at times, but great chances continued to be wasted. Milivojevic looked set to score when he was picked out by a clever Van Aanholt pass but screwed well wide. Hart then had to deal with another Zaha blast before McArthur acrobatically turned the rebound off target, and then the goalscorer seemed set to tap home a Van Aanholt cutback, but a fantastic last-ditch challenge by Charlie Taylor nudged the ball over. Just to add to the anxiety in S3E19, the woodwork was rattled when Zaha bent towards the top corner and beat Hart, but the ball rattled off the bar and landed for McArthur to head goalwards, but the Clarets keeper recovered to make a comfortable catch. But finally, Palace got a second with 30 minutes to go, and if the first was fortunate, there was no doubt in the quality of the second. Cheku Kouyaté played a racking pass towards the left flank for Townsend to chase, and he cut inside and unleashed a rocket of a shot that whizzed straight past the despairing dive of Hart and allowed the relief to pour out of the home supporters. Having only mustered a weak block shot all game, Burnley finally threatened Wayne Hennessy's goal when Ashley Barnes poked over a Sam Vokes knockdown, but the Eagles keeper remarkably wouldn't have to dirty his gloves all game as Hodgson's men cruised to a deserved victory. Crystal Palace fans were celebrating on Saturday night after the Eagles claimed their first home win of the season against Burnley. Goals from James McArthur and Andros Townsend gave the Eagles victory, although it could and probably should have been by a greater margin. There were many talking points arising from the game at Selhurst Park. Here are some of them. The Selhurst Park atmosphere. Much has been made of the Holmesdale Fanatics not being active as a group at Selhurst Park this season. Well, they were back in Block B for this game and they certainly made themselves heard from the off, creating a loud and vibrant atmosphere as they chanted non-stop in the early stages of the game, backed by the noise of the drum. Palace's performance no doubt helped keep the fan spirits high, and this continued throughout as Selhurst Park was rocking, as it has been so many times in recent seasons. Meyer's improvement. In the week, Palace assistant Ray Lewington said that he felt that Max Meyer was starting to show his true ability after taking time to settle at Palace, and it was clear here against Burnley with Meyer involved in much of Palace's good play, particularly early on. He almost opened his account for Palace too with a curled effort from just outside the box, only for Joe Hart to make a superb save to deny him. Palace's wastefulness. Crystal Palace had 29 shots in the game, but only 9 of their efforts were on target, and the fact they only scored twice tells the story of Palace's wastefulness in front of goal. Admittedly, Joe Hart was in good form for Burnley, but the Eagles were guilty of missing some good opportunities as a result of some poor finishing. And while they did get the win, Roy Hodgson admits that the missed chances were a concern for him during the game. Palace still have only scored 10 times in 14 Premier League matches, and we need to improve on that to climb the table. The long wait is over. For several weeks, Crystal Palace have been stuck on 199 wins in the top flight. Ever since their 1-0 win at Huddersfield Town in September, Palace have been waiting for the elusive 200th victory in the top flight and 100th in the Premier League era. 9 games later that has finally come, and Palace fans will be hoping to celebrate many more over the coming seasons. Meanwhile, James McArthur's 16th minute goal ended Palace's wait for a goal from open play at Selhurst Park this season, having previously only scored 2 penalties in the 2-2 draw with Arsenal last month. The last goal the Eagles had scored from open play at home in the league was Wilfried Zaha's strike against West Bromwich Albion on the final day of last season. So now I'm going to move on to my player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on both Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. And also, if you're on Facebook, do feel free to join our Facebook group, which is a really great place to join in with discussions and also share your opinions with other fans. And if you are someone like myself who likes to go onto forums, and as well as obviously posting your own opinion, you'd like to read what other fans like to say, then of course I'd highly recommend you do join the Facebook group. Now, much the same, I do think if you are someone who wants to keep up to date with all the latest Palace news, whether that be transfers, whether that be interviews, whether that just be anything in general sort of regarding the club, as well as sort of our opinion as well, which we post on there, then of course feel free to follow us on both our Twitter and Facebook pages at Crystal Palace. And like I've said, it is a great place. It is a great place to get all the latest news, but also if you want another Palace account just to follow on Twitter, just to get sort of another sort of opinion of the game or of transfers or anything really in general about the club, then of course feel free to follow our pages there. Now, if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then you are on a great place to obviously share your opinion. So of course, if you are listening, then do feel free to drop a comment below the video with your player ratings, where you rate the players' performances from 1 to 10, with of course 10 being the best. Now, the main reason I want you to do this is just so that I can come back to the video, and rather than having my opinion of the game, I can basically just go to the comments and basically see what you, the listeners, thought about the game, and also compare how you thought the players performed, and compare that sort of up against my own player ratings. And basically it just sort of, so we can sort of compare each other and basically see if we had sort of a similar outlook of the game. And likewise, even if you don't want to do that, then of course just comment below with your general views of the game. Now, whether you're a Burnley or Palace fan, just come, if you do find yourself on the podcast, do feel free to share your views, because I'm sure you may have a few different views to me, and certainly I do comment back to them. So if you do want to ask me any questions or do want to get in any discussions, then of course do feel free to drop your general sort of views or general sort of questions below in the comment section, because I certainly will reply to them. But like I've said already, the main reason for that is just so I can come back to the podcast and basically see what the listeners thought, but also any other Palace or Burnley fans who come to the video, not only listening to my opinion, but they can also read the comment section, just so they, like myself, can just get sort of a general sort of more broad, let's say a more broader view of the game, but also so we can obviously have some sort of discussion in the comment section. And that's certainly something I want to see more of. You know, I want to see fans having discussions with each other, you know, asking questions to each other. So if you are someone who's interested in that, then of course do feel free to do that in the YouTube comment section below. Now, if you do want to follow any of the social media pages that I've mentioned or join the Facebook group, then do check all links that will be in the description below. So I'm now going to move on to the player ratings, starting in goal with Wayne Hennessy, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, much like what I've been saying over the last sort of few weeks or so with Wayne Hennessy, in the fact that his performances have been very consistent, and certainly he's been one of our better players this season, this game was no different, albeit he wasn't really tested because Burnley didn't necessarily have that many shots on goal. But I do still think, you know, he put in a very competent performance and certainly done his part to get a clean sheet. And like what I said with Man United, you know, he'd been playing well before that game but hadn't necessarily got a clean sheet as a reward, so it's nice for him to get 2 clean sheets on the bounce to basically reward him for his good performances so far this season. Now, in terms of his performance here, the reason I've given him a 6 is just mainly the fact that because Burnley were playing so poorly, he didn't necessarily have too much to do in terms of saves, but actually you know, I suppose he didn't necessarily have to do much, but there were a few times where he obviously claimed crosses, got down low to obviously get the ball off the opposition. So in that respect, you know, he didn't necessarily have to make too many saves, but when the ball was getting put into the box, you know, when Burnley started to, you know, get their rhythm slightly in the game, albeit they weren't 100%, but you know, second half, I think Burnley slowly started to get into the game, albeit they weren't great. And of course, Hennessy was able just to continue his form from that first half and basically, you know, stop everything that Burnley did put into the box. Now, in terms of a negative about his performance and possibly, in my opinion, one of the reasons I can't really give him a 7 is just that there was a few times, albeit he was good throughout the whole game, there was just a few times where he looked a bit nervy. You know, he did look to sort of hesitate when he caught a few balls or not, but actually, and I suppose crosses in particular, and you know, that's obviously not that great, but the fact that the majority of them he was able to claim, and he was able to, you know, I think his distribution was quite good as well in terms of catching the ball and, you know, passing it out quick. So in that respect, I thought it was a very good performance overall. But like I've said, really, you know, I really can't give him anything higher than a 6, mainly because he obviously done what he had to do, but he wasn't really given much to do in the fact that Burnley was so poor. But like I've said, he obviously swept up when he needed to, you know, made sure that the back four was obviously fairly solid, and like I said, other than a few sort of iffy moments where the ball came into the box and he weren't necessarily, he was quite hesitant, let's say, to catch the ball, other than a few of them chances, I think overall of the game, 90% of the time, he was fairly confident in the side. And like I've said, I can't really going to give him anything higher, mainly because he wasn't really tested in the game. But like I've said, over the last sort of few weeks or so, I'd rather a performance like this where Hennessy's continuing his consistent form, putting in good performances, you know, getting clean sheets, as opposed to him like what he's done sort of 2-3 seasons ago, where he'd have one great game then go missing for 10. I like performances like this from Hennessy in the fact that he's very consistent, you know, continues with this high standard of goalkeeping throughout the season, and even when he isn't tested, when he is called upon, albeit in this game I think it was only twice that Burnley had shots on goal, the fact that he was actually, you know, on guard for these rare occasions that the opposition got forward, that was of course great to see that he was able to deal with that. But Wayne Hennessy in the goal, I'm going to give him a 6 overall. So I'm now going to move on to our first player in our defence, and that is of course the right back Aaron Wan-Bissaka, and I am going to give him a 7 overall for his performance. Now, to be honest, I'm running out of sort of words to describe his performances, because once again, this was another impressive performance from the right back. And you know, you're looking, I said this last season, but when you look at his age, you know, and inexperience basically, you'd think, you know, he might struggle in a few games, but the fact that he continues week in, week out performing performances to this high standard is obviously really impressive. Now, in terms of comparing the performance here against Burnley, it wasn't necessarily as great as his games have been recently, in terms of Man United game in particular, but that's mainly because the opposition weren't really threatening as much as, say, Man United were, so that basically meant that Aaron Wan-Bissaka had a slightly easier game. But the fact that he's still impressed with the few sort of forays forward that Burnley did get, that was of course really impressive. Now, of course, his defensive work, as always, was obviously superb, but the thing that really did impress me, and the reason I'm going to give him the 7, is just the fact that going forward, and the fact that he could show his skills when he was going forward in terms of, you know, dribbling and his speed and agility. That was the thing that really did impress me, because we've known and we've seen it that he's very good defensively, and I've actually been calling for him to, yes, continue with that, but actually try and be a bit more sort of courageous and actually try and go forward, because if you've got the pace and the fact that you used to be a winger, you're going to have the attributes to be a really good attacking fullback. So it was nice to see against Burnley, you know, him getting down that right flank and actually trying to get balls into the box. And you know, there were a few times, I think there was one time where he won a corner, so the fact that he's actually getting into the box, putting balls in, albeit they're not getting into the centre, you know, the fact that he's actually causing the opposition to put the ball out for a corner, that was of course really quite impressive. But like I've said already, you know, obviously going forward and, you know, showing that skill and that sort of ability going forward was obviously great, but the fact that he still was able to do that alongside, you know, carrying out just his good defensive work and just doing that to the standard he normally sets, that was of course great to see. Now, obviously, like I've said already, I really just want to really highlight this point, and the fact that the main reason I'm going to give him the 7 overall is not because his defensive performance was absolutely outstanding, because really you can't really say a player was outstanding when he wasn't really tested by the opposition, but the fact that he impressed at right back once again was obviously great to see. And much like what I said with Hennessy, he obviously was crucial to us getting a clean sheet, which, you know, 2 consecutive clean sheets consecutive clean sheets in a row, and our 5th of the season, you know, that's actually a pretty decent record when you consider how many games we played. So if we can continue with this solid defence going forward, that would of course be great. But like I've said, Aaron Wan-Bissaka, very good at right back, you know, very impressive in terms of his defensive work. But in this game here against Burnley, I was really impressed with his attacking work, and obviously the work rate as well, which went with that. And like I've said, you know, I've called for him in the last sort of few weeks or so to, yes, you know, continue doing what you're doing defensively, but actually try and be more courageous, try and go forward a bit more. So it was actually nice to see him actually not only going forward, but actually getting better going forward and being more effective. So if he can continue that, as well as just his high sort of level of defensive work he's been doing recently, that of course will be great going forward. But Aaron Wan-Bissaka, the young right back, going to give him a 7 overall. Once again, very good defensive and offensive performance from him. So I'm going to move on now to the first of our 2 centre-backs, and that is of course Mamadou Sakho, who I'm going to give an 8 overall. Now obviously, much like what I've said against Man United really, you know, in terms of our back four being very solid, and certainly the two centre-backs being quite key to that, I do think here against Burnley, albeit they didn't really test us, I do think our centre-back partnership were really quite crucial to us, not only in terms of just frustrating the opposition in Burnley, but also just making sure that we were solid at the back and just making sure that we obviously kept our shape. And in terms of playing the ball out from the back, I do think they were quite crucial to that as well, because albeit we weren't really tested, that obviously means you're going to have more time on the ball. I think it was 60% possession, and because we have more time on the ball, we need to be able to play it out from the back. So the fact that the two defenders actually were able to play the ball out from the back really did help us to dominate Burnley even more, because if you can't really do that, you're just going to be pumping long balls forward, and really that 60% possession isn't really going to come to anything. So the fact that we were able to get that possession and make good use of it with our passing out from the back, especially from Sakho in particular, that was of course great to see. But in terms of Sakho's individual performance, and the reason I'm going to give him an 8, and I suppose the main reason is the word I'm going to use, and that's just solid, because I do think at the back, in terms of helping us get that clean sheet, and in terms of just, you know, frustrating Burnley, I think he done a very solid job there at the back. And like I've said, you know, Burnley's front men, you know, we've seen them in seasons gone by, playing that 4-4-2, much like what we do, you know, one striker playing off the other. They've obviously done quite a lot of damage to us. You know, you look back to Frank de Boer's era. Yes, we played great in that game, but obviously Burnley once again being very potent up top. You go back to last season, obviously I think they, you know, when we played them, obviously that was quite a difficult challenge in the fact that they play their two up top. So the fact that they've got, you know, a very solid base going forward, you know, obviously is quite a challenge. But the fact that we dealt with it really well was obviously, you know, well, the fact that we dealt with it with such good performances from the whole team, but especially the defence, that was of course great to see. And I do want to correct myself, because I do said last season we played them at home and they were quite good at a partnership. I do think it was under Allardyce. So the season before that, when they played, I think the game finished 2-0 in the end, they were playing 4-4-2 up top, and obviously that ripped us apart. So if you're looking at, you know, the last sort of 4 or 5 games against Burnley, obviously it's been sort of fairly even contested, in the fact that Burnley have won a few, Palace have won a few. But in terms of the attacking play, I do think Burnley playing that 4-4-2 obviously has caused us problems in the past. So obviously it was great to see people like Sakho and Tompkins do their job defensively to obviously make sure that we basically kept them quiet. Now in terms of, you know, negatives about his performance, yes, I've given him an 8, but of course there's always some negatives in players' performances. Apart from one dodgy moment, which obviously is the bad moment, you know, he was... Apart from that, you know, obviously giving the ball away, being quite sloppy, I do think he was very composed at the back. You know, quite a lot of the time, the ball was coming over the top, Burnley trying to play the ball long, and he'd just chest the ball down really coolly and get it to the ground, lovely touch, and you know, play the ball out from the back. Or there was other chances where he'd take the ball out down on his chest, and then a Burnley player's coming at him and he just takes the ball around him, and obviously quite calmly plays the ball out from the back as well. So them two situations where you'd think some players that could be a bit dodgy, you know, they're trying to sort of be too clever in terms of, you know, getting the ball down on their chest, you know, dribbling past players and then passing the ball out from the back. But the fact that Sakho was very composed with it and actually done it really well, not only the getting the ball out of the air and down to the ground and controlling it, but the fact that he was also able to you know, play it out from the back so accurately as well. That was of course really impressive as well. But overall, Mamadou Sakho here really impressed me at the back, you know, with his defensive work. But the main thing I really did like about his performance, and you know, the main reason I'm going to give him the 8, is because of his composure and the fact that he was so many times, you know, he was able to take the ball, you know, out of the air, you know, literally swing, sort of spin past players, get the ball forward, as well as playing it out from the back. So for me, I do think they're one of the main reasons he had obviously had a good performance, and certainly I do think he does deserve the 8 overall. And you know, do comment below with your thoughts about Sakho's performance, and actually whether you do like this sort of style of play we're playing at the minute, because obviously under Frank de Boer we tried to play the ball out from the back, it didn't quite work, but obviously Roy Hodgson has got this system going where we can still play Route 1 football, we can still play lovely counter-attacking football, but actually we've now got the ability, as shown in the Burnley game here, where actually we've got players in defence especially who are actually quite capable of playing it out from the back and playing, you know, being very composed in possession. So once again, good performance from Sakho at the back. So now I'm going to move on to his centre-back partner in James Tompkins, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, much like what I said with Sakho, in the fact that he obviously defended really well and was very composed at the back, I'm really going to say much the same for James Tompkins, because I do think, much like what I said with Hennessy, in the fact that you know, he was one of our most consistent players this season, Tompkins is in that same bracket because he's been very consistent this season, and certainly being solid at the back and being composed is something we've come to just expect from James Tomkins this season, and certainly once again he carried on that sort of consistency here and put in a very good performance against Burnley. Now obviously at the back, like I've said already, he was obviously very composed for the most part, and once again, Burnley have got that threat up top, albeit it hasn't really clicked this season, but they've obviously still got a threat up top, so the fact that he was able to stay composed and deal with that threat relatively well was obviously great to see. And in terms of, I said with Saka, in terms of bringing the ball out of the air and dribbling with it and obviously getting the ball out of danger, Tomkins didn't necessarily do that much because I suppose he's good at ball playing, but he isn't as great as Saka is. But I do think a number of times I sort of lost count where Tomkins would literally dominate the forward and literally just head the ball clear. So the fact that we've got someone who can obviously take the ball out of the air and dribble forward, as well as someone in Tomkins who can actually just head the ball clear and just get rid of the danger, as well as clearing the ball with massive hooves forward. The fact that we've got two players who complement each other really well with their sort of different styles, that was of course quite impressive as well. But that's not to say that Tomkins wasn't good in possession and actually was able to get the ball forward well. I just think you've got Saka who's a lot better at it, and obviously Tomkins is just route one, clear the ball when you have the danger, and certainly he did do that. And like I've said, Burnley, yes, they haven't really clicked this season, and obviously we completely dominated them here, but obviously they've still got a threat. So the fact that the back four, and obviously Tomkins as well with his headering ability, the fact they were able to deal with them, that was of course great to see as well. But much like with Saka, obviously there's a few negatives from his performance. I did feel that Tomkins did get caught in possession a couple of times and a couple of occasions, but really, the fact that Burnley weren't really playing that great, they weren't really under much, or weren't really putting us under much pressure, it basically meant that we weren't really punished for it. But I suppose that's something really to pick out. But I suppose, much like what I said with Tomkins, in terms of just a word to describe a performance, I do think outstanding was just one for Tomkins, because I really do think, other than them few times where he was caught in possession, I do think it was an absolute sort of faultless performance in the fact that he defended well, and obviously, that obviously includes, making tackles, making challenges, making it difficult for the opposition, as well as obviously, making these massive headers to clear the ball, like I've already mentioned. And, in terms of another word I suppose you could use, it's just bossed, because, when you consider Burnley, yes, they haven't been playing great, and I'm going to keep coming back to this point, but it is really important. Burnley, on their day, they've got some really sort of potent strikers up top, and obviously Sean Dyche has got them well drilled. Hasn't really clicked for them this season, but normally, they pose some sort of threat. But the fact that Tomkins bossed them every time, and then some as well, the fact that he just made it so difficult for them by just absolutely basically making it near impossible for them to get in and get in behind the back line, that was of course great to see as well. Now of course it doesn't help the opposition in the fact that we have 60% possession, so they're not really going to have that many chances, and in that respect you could say that actually Tomkins wasn't really that challenged, let's say, by Burnley. But nevertheless, when Burnley did get a few chances forward, obviously he did deal with them really well. So James Tomkins here, alongside Mamadou Sakho, I'm going to give him a 7 overall. So I'm going to move on now to the final player in our defence, and that is of course the left back Patrick Van Aanholt, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now what I've said over the last sort of few weeks in terms of Van Aanholt's performances is the fact that they haven't necessarily been bad, they've just been fairly average, and it's actually good to see him here against Burnley, albeit they've sort of one of the easier oppositions. I don't want to say Burnley are easy oppositions, but in comparison to the Chelseas, the Arsenals, Tottenhams, the games that we've had recently, it obviously is a slightly easier game on paper. And of course Van Aanholt here, yes, let's imagine it's easier opposition. He obviously had a lot of joy down that left hand side, and it did seem to improve his performances when you consider, when you sort of compare it to the last sort of month or so. Now in terms of chances he had throughout the game, he had a shot from distance that was straight at Joe Hart in the first half. So literally right from the get-go we were battling Burnley, and when you consider we had 29 shots on goal, the fact that we started as soon as the first whistle gone, we were constantly putting pressure on that Burnley goal. That was of course great to see. And in the last sort of few weeks or so, I've been criticising Van Aanholt for not necessarily his defensive work, but the fact that he wasn't necessarily going forward and he weren't looking for the overlap. In this game it was completely different. He was always looking to go forward, always an option on the overlap, and as we saw quite early on in the game, in the fact that he had a few shots at Joe Hart, and in the second half especially, where he obviously got forward at every opportunity and actually got on the end of a few passes or a few counter-attacks. The fact that we saw that in this game was obviously really impressive. But like I've said already, and I really want to highlight this, but I've been saying, last sort of few months or so, he's been very good. He's been good enough defensively. I can't really fault him there, other than one of the goals, a few weeks ago, where obviously lacking in that offensive work, other than the goal he scored. So it was actually nice to see him get that freedom down that left hand side, getting forward at every opportunity, whilst also contributing to the clean sheet with just his very good defensive work. And I do think, yes, Burnley may not have the fastest players, but when you've got someone like Vanana who's got that pace to actually help you defend, that obviously just makes all the difference. Because if you've got someone who isn't fast in the Burnley attack against someone like Vanana or Wan-Bissaka who's got so much pace, it's obviously going to be quite difficult for them, because obviously you've got the advantage in terms of the pace. But like I've said, good defensive performance, and obviously a great attacking performance in the fact that he's improved on recent weeks. And like I've said, he had a few shots on goal as well, which of course is a step, let's say, in the right direction. Now, much like what I've said with a few players already, yes, they had good performances, but he was sort of guilty of a few things in the game. And obviously, the thing that he was guilty of here is, you could look at it in one way and go, yes, I've just praised him for his attacking work, so obviously it's great that he's getting into the opportunities, getting into these positions. But on the flip side to that is, yes, he's getting into these positions more often, which of course is what I've been asking for, but then he's obviously going forth and missing his chances, and that's basically what he was guilty of in the game. You look at Sacco and Tompkins, they were just sort of guilty of just giving the ball away quite cheaply at times, whereas Vanana, it wasn't necessarily anything to do with the opposition, it's just the fact that he was just missing a few good chances throughout the game. Now, like I've said already, going down that left hand side on the overlap, he obviously was proving quite a threat, and a number of times, especially in that second half where Burnley were obviously quite open, he'd go down that left hand side on the counter attack. Someone like Meyer would spread the ball out to him. Someone like Wilf would obviously, do 1-2s with him. And quite a lot of the time he was going down that left wing. And, as opposed to sort of maybe taking his shot first time, he's obviously taken one touch too many, or he's tried to put the ball into the box too early or too late. And it's just chances like that went missing, which obviously isn't great. And there was obviously, a few chances as well where he actually got into the box right by the ball, right by the goalkeeper, and rather than shooting on target, it's obviously gone out. So I suppose you could look at it in one sense, like I've said already, in the fact that it's great that he's now starting to go forward and he's going back to his old self in terms of his attacking play. But then the other way you've got to look at it is go, yes, it's great that he's going forward, but he isn't necessarily being clinical. So I suppose if I had to criticise one thing, is the fact that he's getting forward, which is good, but obviously he's missing his chances there. But like I've said already, in terms of the 7 overall, yes, his offensive work was great, and that's one of the reasons I'm going to give him a 7, because he obviously contributed to the clean sheet. But the main thing for me is the fact that he actually went back, done his defensive work, as well as just providing that threat down the left. So the fact that he was able to combine, much like Wan-Bissaka, he was able to combine both that threat down the left with his defensive work and actually just helping to contribute to that clean sheet, albeit we weren't really tested by the Burnley players. It obviously was great to see. So Patrick Vanana here, a much better performance on recent weeks, and hopefully going forward, getting that mix between the defensive and offensive work, hopefully that will help him to improve in the coming weeks. So I'm going to move on now to the first player in our midfield, and that is the captain, Luka Milivojevic, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, in terms of a performance with Luka, he sort of had his sort of epiphany, let's say, in the last sort of few weeks or so, because at the beginning of the season he wasn't really great, and quite a lot of people were calling for him to be dropped, because people like Chiarte and Meyer as well, in his few sort of glimpses in the side, were obviously performing better. But actually, last sort of few games or so, 3 or 4 games, Lucas seemed to have turned the corner, and now his performances seem to be back to his best and how he was at the end of last season. Now, in terms of a word to describe his performance here against Burnley, I think I'll use the word industrious, because I do think he was exactly that in the midfield. Now, what I mean by that is the fact that he was constantly running, covering a lot of ground for the team, and basically just doing everything you'd want from a central midfielder, doing offensive work in terms of getting the ball forward, and obviously doing his defensive work, making challenges, and basically, much like the back four, just making life difficult for the Burnley forwards. Now, the thing I did like about his performance, and this is something which he'd been missing at the beginning of the season, is the fact that he was just getting his foot in at times, to win possession, to get the ball back of the opposition, as well as, like I've said, showing a good range of passing to obviously keep the ball moving. And, you look at them 2 points, putting his foot in, making challenges, getting possession back, obviously showing, his good sort of industrious defensive work. And of course, the fact that when he is able to do that, he's able to pass the ball forward as well and just keep the game flowing. That obviously contributes to his offensive work. So, obviously, the beginning of the season, he obviously wasn't great at either of them, obviously making tackles. He obviously missed a few of them at the beginning of the season, and we went on to concede goals. And obviously, once again, at the beginning of the season, he wasn't necessarily, looking to play the ball forward. So the fact that he's able to sort of turn that corner and do that, whilst also just having a general sort of just industrious performance in midfield, covering a lot of ground, making life difficult for the opposition, as well as, putting your foot in and basically just doing your part for the team. That was of course great to see. Now in terms of, once again, a negative I suppose of his performance is the fact that maybe he could have done better. There was a chance when the ball fell to him just inside the Burnley box in the second half, but obviously he dragged his effort just wide of the mark. Now at that point it was 1-0, so you could be thinking that could be the goal, or that could be the chance just to end the game. 2-0, kill the game off there. But of course we did go on to score later on in the game, but nevertheless, when you've got a good chance like that, you need to take it, especially at 1-0, just to make sure you can see the game out. But like I've said already, yes, his performance was good, but obviously there's a negative in the fact that, much like Vanano, in the fact that his performance was good, he could have made it even better if he obviously had taken that chance there. And you know, you look back at the replays of it, and especially, you know, you're sitting in the stand looking at it, you're sort of really gobsmacked as to why he missed it, because he's literally right in front of the Burnley goal, and rather than looking for the far court, or rather than sort of just blasting it, putting it you know, on target, he's tried to, you know, put it away from the goalkeeper, tried to get it into that far corner, but of course it's missed, and they obviously rolled out for a goal kick. So in terms of a chance, he obviously had a great chance there to, you know, get the second goal, see the game out. Obviously, luckily for us, we went on to score later on, but you know, it does still beg the question that when you've had such a good performance, you could have made it even better if you had scored from that chance. But much like what I said with Vanano, you know, if he's starting to now get into these positions, he's only going to get better from here, and hopefully that is the case, and hopefully we'll see an improvement in his performances going forth next season. But I just want to finish by saying, obviously, the main reason I'm going to give him a 7 is just the fact that it was much more than like the Luka of last season. You know, last season, yes, you may say, you know, he set the bar too high in terms of it's a very hard sort of standard to keep up, but obviously it was nice to see him after sort of his slow start to the season, a bit lethargic, let's say. It was actually nice to see him be back to himself, you know, being industrious in the midfield, making life difficult for the opposition, as well as, you know, like I've said, doing his defensive work by getting his foot and, you know, making challenges, as well as doing his offensive work by getting on the end of chances like he did in the Burnley box, as well as obviously passing to obviously get the ball moving. So once again, a good performance from the captain, and long may they continue. So I'm now going to move on to his midfield partner in Kouyaté, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now in terms of Kouyaté's performance, I do want to highlight in the fact that, much like what I said with Tompkins and Hennessy, in the fact that he's, you know, they've been consistent players this season, I do certainly think since Kouyaté's been sort of a mainstay in the side and has been playing sort of week in, week out, I do certainly think he's been up there with one of our most consistent players. And you know, when you consider, you know, West Ham fans told us when we signed him that he's very inconsistent, isn't really that great in midfield, and ultimately he's sort of a liability. The fact that he's actually come into this Palace side and certainly, you know, made that sort of position next to Luka his own, whilst also playing so well, that was of course great to see. And it's obviously nice to see that actually once again we've signed a player from West Ham who obviously West Ham fans have said weren't that great. And the fact that he's performing great for us is obviously great to see. Now in terms of his chances throughout the game, he obviously came quite close to opening the scoring quite early on, but obviously just failed to get on the end of Wilfried Zaha's fizz ball across the goal. So once again, like what I said with Luka, in the fact that he was actually inside the box at times in the game, actually getting on the end of chances, it was much the same for Kouyaté. You know, early on in the game, Wolves got the ball into the box, and Kouyaté literally from a few yards out obviously failed just to get on the end of that. But the fact that we've got that attacking intent so early on in the game, you know, to get the ball into the box and to get a central midfielder, you know, in the box to get on the end of that chance, that was of course great to see. And like I've said already, you know, I'll go on to talk about Wilf later on, but the fact that Wilf was actually looking to attack and had that intent so early on in the game, and the fact that Kouyaté was looking to get into the box so early on in the game as well, that was of course great to see. Now in terms of his play in the midfield, you know, much like what I said with Luka in the fact that he was industrious, I do think that's much the same for Kouyaté, in the fact that he covered a lot of ground and basically he was making it difficult for Burnley. And in terms of, you know, winning that midfield battle, you know, winning control of the game, obviously he was part of that and certainly was quite key to us winning that battle. And when you consider we had 60% possession, you've got to look at the midfield and go, actually they were obviously quite important for that. But in terms of his individual performance, I do think he was very neat and tidy between the boxes. So the fact that he was able to deal with the ball well in terms of, you know, his passing, and the fact that he was able to, you know, make challenges and be very tidy with his overall play, that was of course great to see as well. Now much like what I said, in the fact that he was able to get into the box for chances as well as doing his defensive work, that's basically what he did. You know, he helped out in the attack by obviously getting the ball forward, and of course, you know, by getting on the end of chances, as well as obviously helping out in the defence, because he was playing alongside Luka, playing slightly deeper than say someone like Meyer and McArthur were. So the fact that he was playing slightly deeper meant that he obviously done his defensive work for Palace, but he also obviously went forward and got on the end of chances as well. So obviously it was great to see him, much like what I said with Vanano, in the fact that he was doing both his defensive and offensive work. The fact that Kouyaté was able to do that and combine it so well, that was of course great to see. Now obviously, like I've said already, in terms of being very consistent, I do think it's up there with one of his best performances for Palace, and that's obviously he's only played a few games, so the fact that I'm making that statement already shows, you know, how good he has been, in the fact that he's had loads of good games, but this is the best one yet. And at the moment he seems to be getting better and better each game, and whether that's just because he's in himself he's getting better, or whether it's the fact that he's embedded into a team, but as the games go on he's slowly becoming a bigger sort of part of the team. Whatever it is, he obviously seems to be getting better. And you know, the thing that I really like about him is, yes, he can obviously do defensive and offensive work, but the fact that he's got that strength, he's got that physicality, and the fact that he's got that ability to dominate in the midfield, you know, winning all of the balls, making challenges, you know, getting the ball forward, that was of course great to see. Now the final point really for me, and one of the main reasons I'm going to give him a 7, is just that fantastic assist for Townsend's goal. Now of course Townsend's goal was great and is going to be up there, much like his one was in the League Cup, he's going to be up there with one of the goals of the season. But actually, if you look aside from that, the assist for the goal was almost as good as the goal itself. You know, Kouyaté, once again, like I've said already, taking the ball from the defence, driving forward. That was of course great to see, and we saw that throughout the whole game. But then he pings an absolutely fantastic pass down that right hand side to obviously Andros Townsend, and obviously Townsend's done the rest, cut inside, put it top corner. So obviously the goal was great, but actually the assist which came before it from Kouyaté pushing forward and then pinging that ball to the right hand side, that was of course great to see. And like I've said, it was nice, like what I said with Hennessy, the fact that he got a clean sheet as a reward or something to show for his performance. It was actually nice to see that Kouyaté got rewarded with the assist, because really he had such a great performance in midfield, because he obviously helped us to dominate it. So the fact that he obviously got his reward in what was a fantastic assist was obviously great to see. And actually it once again goes to show that we've got this ability, you know, playing the ball out from deep, you know, with people like Kouyaté and Lucas. So if they can continue to do that and continue putting balls like that into the box and supplying our attackers, then obviously that sort of connection between the defence and the attack is only going to get better. So hopefully this sort of good midfield play, especially from individuals, you know, in terms of Kouyaté and Lucas, hopefully that will carry on. But Cheikhou Kouyaté here, once again, you know, playing very good defensively in terms of getting the ball forward and obviously getting the assist, but also he combined that with his good defensive work. You know, basically you're using his strength and physicality to obviously you know, dominate the midfield and making it difficult for Burnley. So once again, Cheikhou Kouyaté, a 7 for him, a very good performance. So I'm now going to move slightly further up the pitch, you know, still staying in the midfield, but obviously looking at sort of our wide midfielders who obviously tuck inside. And I'm going to start with Max Meyer, who once again, like he's been doing recently, he's obviously once again putting a very good performance, and certainly starting to show glimpses of what we expected from him, you know, when we did sign him. And for that reason, I'm going to give him a 9 overall. Now in terms of, you know, the performance itself, it is obviously one of his best for Palace, and one of his best obviously he's played for us so far. And one of the main reasons for that is just the fact that he was getting involved in much of our good play. Now obviously when you have 60% possession, you're going to have a lot of control of the game, you're going to dominate the midfield so well. And personally for me, because we had so much possession, it meant that people like Meyer could actually show their best ability. And the fact that whenever we got the ball forward, because we had so much time and basically space on the ball, people like Meyer were able to get involved in our attacks, because we basically were able just to, you know, ping balls around the pitch and basically just get around Burnley. Now obviously in terms of chances himself, he was obviously playing as a wide sort of tucked in midfielder, so in a sense we were playing 4-4-2, but if you're looking at it practically, it was probably a 4-2-2-2, in the fact that Meyer and McArthur were playing sort of narrow and sort of in behind the strike force of Andros and Wilf. Now in terms of his attacking chances, you know, he almost opened to the count for the club, and that was basically because a few times he got the ball, had lots of space on the edge of the area, and obviously put a few curled efforts trying to get it into the far corner. Obviously one of them was saved by a smart stop by Joe Hart, who I must say was on very good form in this game here against us, like he always does really. You know, when he was playing for West Ham he was great, and once again here against Burnley he was great. So obviously that was a great chance in terms of Meyer cutting inside and curling it into the far corner, and obviously Joe Hart made the save there. And then there was another one, you know, a few moments later where he's cut inside once again and it's gone just wide. So not only is Meyer showing his ability in the midfield now, in the fact that he's getting involved and, you know, passing the ball around the pitch, you know, getting around the opposition, but also he's showing now that he's actually got that ability to shoot, you know, by cutting inside and, you know, he's got a real good curl on his ball, so he's shown that he actually can, you know, curl the ball. And, you know, you look back at some of the videos of him, and you look back at some of the stats of him, you know, when he was at Schalke, he didn't necessarily score that many goals, but obviously if you look at his defensive stats, they were good last season. So of course many of us were expecting he's going to be a very good sort of workhorse, let's say, for the team. He's going to do a lot of stuff in midfield, you know, defensive and offensive work, but he isn't necessarily going to get many goals or assists. But actually playing in this role in that 4-4-2 seems to have done him the world of good, because like I've said here, even though he didn't score in this game or get an assist, the fact that he was actually getting chances through on goal shows that he's actually got that ability, you know, to score a goal. And hopefully, you know, in the games coming up, with him slowly sort of settling into that role in the side, hopefully we could see more of that, you know, more cutting inside from him going forward. Now obviously McArthur's goal is a weird one, and I'll talk about it in a minute. Now, me personally sitting in the stand, I thought that Meyer got the final touch on it, and that's why, you know, we were all celebrating. I'm thinking, Max Meyer, great, he's got his first goal for the club. And then, obviously, over the tannoy, they've announced that McArthur got the goal. Now, obviously, we weren't disappointed, because it was McArthur's first goal of the season. Obviously, great for him to open up his account, but actually it was so difficult to see who scored that goal, because it was so bizarre, you know, sitting in the stands. Now, in terms of the goal itself, you know, nice link-up play on that right hand side, you know, between McArthur and Townsend. Obviously McArthur's tried to whip the ball in, tried to cross the ball in to Meyer, who was obviously basically on the penalty spot, running forward. And obviously as he's done that, McArthur's put the ball in, and it's basically evaded both the defenders and Meyer and the goalkeeper as well, and it's gone to the far post, and rather than it just brushing the far post, it's obviously bounced and obviously gone in. So in terms of that, you know, you look back at what McArthur said, and McArthur said if it wasn't for Meyer actually making that run and basically making it look like he was going to get on the ball and basically to throw the goalkeeper and defenders, the fact that he was able to do that, albeit he didn't get a touch, that was of course great to see as well. So even when he isn't necessarily on the ball, Meyer's still having an impact in the fact that he's obviously making that space available and obviously making it difficult for the defenders. But personally for me, like I've said, sitting in the stand, I did think he did get the goal, because it was very bizarre. You know, McArthur on that right hand side obviously crossed the ball in. He's fully expecting someone to tap it in, but instead it's just found in the far post and gone in anyway. Now, something which I often do say with most of our midfield players is the fact that they put in a shift, and certainly that's what Meyer did, and that's one of the reasons. Obviously the fact that he got involved in all of the good play that Palace had, obviously that was quite good, and that's one of the reasons he's got the 9. But the fact that he put in such a shift, you know, working hard for the team and just helping us to dominate what was a poor Burnley side, that was the thing that really did impress me. Because you could think, you know, against opposition who are not necessarily playing that good, you know, they're quite poor, you could think you'd just lower the gears and basically not necessarily perform to your best, because you know that the opposition aren't necessarily playing well. But the fact that Meyer still kept up these high standards and just worked hard for the team and basically helped us to dominate a poor Burnley side, that was of course great to see as well. Now, in terms of something away from his performance, is basically the reception he got from the fans. Now, I personally obviously was delighted with his performance when he went off, and obviously, you know, I think it's right that he got the good reception that he did. But obviously it was nice to see that the fans are finally on side of him, because although we knew he was a big signing and he was obviously hopefully going to do big things for us, there was obviously a few debating it where, you know, his few cameos off the bench, he was playing good in some, cold, he wasn't playing that great in the other, and basically he was sort of hot and cold and sort of dividing opinion. So it was nice to see him that actually put in a good performance and finally obviously get rewarded with that good reception when he went off late in the game. And hopefully that is a sign for him to of what's to come from him in a Palace shirt, because it was very encouraging. You know, not only the fact that he performed so well, but also the fact that fans are now on his side. So hopefully with that support and the fact that he's putting in good performances, hopefully that can sort of spur him on going forward. Now, the final thing really for me is not necessarily about him as a whole, but I do certainly think that the formation, or the team we started with on Saturday, albeit maybe McArthur might drop out when Benteke's back and Townsend moves out wide, I think that the formation we've got at the minute, you know, 4-4-2 or 4-2-2-2, or whichever way you look at it, I think that seems to be working at the minute. And obviously a few weeks ago we were playing Max Meyer wide in that position, and we weren't necessarily seeing the best from him, because he isn't necessarily the quickest and he's not the tallest, so he can't necessarily take the ball forward. But when he plays in the sort of system we played on Saturday, where he's quite narrow, that seems to get the best out of him. So hopefully in the games going forward, we continue with the starting 11, because obviously you want to play your best 11, but also just so that we can utilise him and get the best out of him. Because as he showed in this game here, when you're given that sort of free role where he's still he's still meant to be a wide player, but the fact that he's quite narrow and has got that ability to, you know, go down the middle, that was of course great to see. Now, in terms of himself, I do think he was, you know, really to finish it, he was obviously quite unlucky to score himself. Obviously, he helped in terms of McArthur's goal by throwing off the defenders, but actually, if you look at the amount of chances he had, you know, the times he cut inside, had shots, the time he obviously, you know, setting up other players. When you look at these chances that he could have scored or he could have set up other teammates to score, he was really unlucky that none of them did come off, because I do think his performance certainly did warrant that. But the reason I'm going to give him a 9 is just the fact that he was everywhere, and I do think his performance does deserve that. Now, I said with someone like Hennessy or Vanano, in the fact that they performed well and they haven't necessarily been rewarded recently, and this was sort of the case here with Meyer, in the fact that he performed so well but he hasn't necessarily got anything to show for it other than the good performance, because it would have been so nice for him to get a goal or get an assist, because that certainly would have been sort of the cherry on the cake for his performance, and probably a 10 out of 10, because that's really how well he did play in the game. But overall, going to give Max Meyer a 9, mainly because he was just involved with all of the good play that Palace had, and when you consider in the midfield and obviously the team as a whole, when you consider we had 60% possession, I do think he used it very effectively, and obviously did show his skills on the ball in the fact that he was able to, you know, be involved in our good play, whether that be, you know, all of our attacks, our counter-attacks going forward, whatever it was in that respect, he was obviously great at that. But off the ball as well, I do think he done a shift there. And like I said already, you know, the fact that he put in a shift for the team, worked hard for the team, as well as just helping us dominate in the midfield, that was really what was quite impressive for me. And obviously, you know, like what I said with quite a lot of players already this podcast, long may performances like this continue. So I'm going to move on now to the final player in our midfield, and that is of course James McArthur, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, of course, McArthur, you know, much like what I said with Vanano, in the fact that quite recently he hasn't necessarily been the greatest. He's just been fairly average, and certainly if you're looking sort of at an average of all of his performances over the season, you're probably looking at a 5 or a 6 overall, mainly because he hasn't necessarily been terrible. He's just sort of failed to impress me quite a lot this season. But obviously it was great to see him here, you know, net his first goal of the season. And obviously he was quite fortunate in the fact that it came off the post. Well, it was a cross firstly, and it came off the post. But like I sort of mentioned briefly with Meyer, the fact that Meyer actually made that run in, obviously made that run for the penalty spot, obviously made it difficult for the two defenders to obviously know whether Meyer was or wasn't going to get a touch. And of course, because Meyer's right in front of the goalkeeper as well, and the fact that the ball was just going into that far corner, it obviously made it quite difficult for obviously the defence and the goalkeeper. So ultimately, yes, it was quite a fluky goal in the fact that he's crossed the ball and it's gone in. But actually, in another respect, you know, if you look at what the teammates were doing, actually it was quite a well thought out goal, in the fact that Meyer, I mean, maybe not even intentionally, but the fact that he obviously got in the way and made it difficult for them was one of the reasons why we obviously did score from that chance. Now, like I've said already, it is quite a lucky goal to score, but I certainly do think that a goal could sort of kick on his season, so hopefully that could sort of be the trigger for his performances going forward, because McArthur's one of these confidence players. I feel that, yes, he can be fairly consistent, but he isn't always, you know, playing like 7 out of 10s. He's almost always to 5s or 6s out of 10s, and that's great. You've got a consistent player who can consistently play well, but if you can play someone who can play very well, like McArthur did in this game here, you know, that would be great going forward. So hopefully that goal he's got, albeit quite lucky, hopefully that can sort of kick him on this season. Now, alongside that goal, I do think, much like what I said with Meyer, in the fact that he was playing slightly further forward, but in a quite narrow, wide role, you know, he was drifting from both positions. I do think he had a number of good opportunities himself to obviously get a few more goals and get on the score sheet, and one of the main reasons for that is just the fact that he found himself in very good positions in an attacking sense. And you know, like I've said already, with this being one of his better performances of late, one of the reasons for that, and one of the reasons I've given him a 7, is just the fact that how much he improved his offensive performance. And you know, like what I said with Meyer, in the fact that he was getting involved, getting on the end of chances inside the box, and actually Chiarte as well to an extent, in the fact that he was getting on the end of chances. I do think McArthur done exactly that, in the fact that, yes, he done his midfield work well, and he obviously went back and tracked back defensively because he was playing on that right hand side, but he also combined that by, like I said, getting into these good positions in an attacking sense, and obviously that was great to see. Now, in terms of a word to describe his performance, I'd use the word everywhere, and that's basically really just sort of epitomises his performance, in the fact that whenever we were dominating in the midfield, but McArthur was one of these players who was everywhere, you know, doing his defensive work, doing his offensive work, making tackles, making blocks, putting passes forward. So basically he was doing everything you would expect from a central midfielder, or a central wide midfielder as he was in this game. And the fact that he was just everywhere, in a sense that he was doing everything, or he was basically doing all of the jobs you would expect from all of the players along the pitch, that was of course great to see. And obviously, you know, I go back to the chances he had, you know, much like what I said with Meyer, he obviously didn't necessarily have, well, in his case he had a goal to to show for his performance, but he probably could have had a hat-trick because of the amount of chances he had. So in the same way that Meyer didn't necessarily have anything to show for his good performance other than the fact that he had a good performance, McArthur was one of the same, where he didn't actually have more than one goal to show for his good performance. And I certainly do think his performance in the midfield, in the fact that he obviously helped us dominate, I do think maybe another goal or maybe even an assist would have really showed and really epitomised how good his performance was, because albeit he did get the goal, I do think his performance maybe warranted more. And when you consider the amount of chances he had, if it wasn't for some of the brilliant defending from Burnley, he probably could have had a hat trick. So it's obviously great to see him putting in a good midfield partnership. But the main reason I'm going to give him a 7 is just because of how much he improved in an attacking sense. And long may that continue going forward. And like I said with Meyer, if we continue with the same sort of formation and same sort of system where we play a 4-4-2, but Meyer and McArthur are playing slightly more narrow and have that freedom to go in behind the strike force, if we do continue with that, we hopefully will see the best from McArthur going forward. But James McArthur here, I'm going to give him a 7 overall. So I'm now going to move on to the first of our 2 attacking players, and obviously that is Andros Townsend, who I'm going to give an 8 overall for his performance. Now, much like what I mentioned last weekend, obviously against Man United, where Townsend was both playing down the middle, obviously as a striker, and obviously out wide throughout parts of the game as well. This was sort of the same here again against Burnley, and certainly when you consider the goal he did score, that did come from out wide. Once again, just sort of highlights the fact that he started the game quite central, but then towards the end of the game, where he was playing his best football, he obviously was drifting out wide. Now, like I've said already, obviously started the game up front, and actually towards the beginning of the game, once again, like I've said, in the fact that Palace were just attacking from the off, from that first whistle, Townsend was one of these attacking players that whenever he did get forward, he was delivering some lovely teasing deliveries into the box, and certainly when he did sort of drift out wide, he certainly did do that as well. So the fact that he's able to still play in a sort of quite a narrow, sort of quite centred position, whilst also being able to sort of drift that wide to deliver teasing chances and deliveries into the box, that's of course great to see. And I've talked about this quite a lot already, but the fact that he's got that versatility to play both down the middle, obviously to get on the end of chances, whilst also drifting out wide to actually put some teasing chances in the box as well, that was of course great to see. And obviously I'm going to talk about the goal in a minute, but when you consider he was putting so many chances inside the box, that is one of the reasons he's got the 8 as opposed to the goal, is because of just how good he was offensively, and the fact that he was obviously creating chances for his teammates. Now, of course, alongside putting deliveries into the box, him himself was actually causing problems for the defence himself. And like what I said with a few players already, it was mainly because he was getting into some good positions. Now, of course, when he was out wide, he was getting into good positions in the sense that he was able to deliver balls into the box, but when he was playing quite narrow and quite central, he was obviously getting into good positions in the fact that he was able to get in behind the defence and obviously get on the end of chances as well. So the fact that he was able to combine both his sort of striker role or primarily his striker role playing down the middle with obviously his role out wide on that right hand side, that was of course great to see as well. But then of course, this is all well and great, playing well, attacking the opposition, but obviously he had to have something to show from it, and that was basically when he delivered that absolutely standout moment of the game, and that was of course his stunning strike to make it 2-0. Now, I talked about it with Chiarte, and the fact that the assist was great, and the fact that Chiarte drove forward, pinged the ball out to the right hand side, that was obviously great. But the fact that Townsend took the ball, got past one player, got onto the edge of the area, and basically just from outside the area, about 20 yards out, he literally rifled it into that top far corner. No chance Joe Hart was going to get onto it, and if you look back at the images, he's like literally a metre away from saving it. So the fact that he's able to cut inside so accurately and get it into the top corner with the power, with the accuracy and the dip as well, that was of course great to see. And obviously watching in the stands, it was obviously quite nerve-wracking every time seeing him on the ball, because whenever he was delivering balls into the box, they were great, but whenever he was shooting from outside of the box, the balls were going out of the stadium. Now, a few minutes before he obviously scored the goal, there was one chance in particular, pretty similar to the goal he scored, in the fact that he cut inside from that right hand side, but rather than putting it on target like the goal, he obviously put the ball out of the stand. And obviously when I first saw him cut inside, I thought, here we go again, he's going to blast it out. But then when I saw it, I was like, oh my god, so ecstatic. The fact that he was able to make up for that, with the balls he put out of the stand by absolutely rifling it into the top corner, that was of course great to see as well. Now, of course, I've given him an 8 because of his attacking play and the fact that he obviously got that absolutely fantastic goal, which of course he's already scored a screamer like that already this season. So the fact that he's got 2 goals up there already for goals of the season is obviously quite impressive, but the fact that he was able to score it in this game to make it 2-0, kill the game off, that is of course really important. Now, I talked about already a few players missing chances, you know, Chiarte, Luca, to obviously kill the game off. At that point, the game was, one match ended, whatever, because Townsend obviously scored it with a spectacular moment. And like I've said, if he can do that more often, it will be great, because as we saw in the game, I suppose all of the good chances, he obviously made up with that with other bad chances as well. So for every goal he scores like that, there might be 3 or 4 other chances from similar situations where he puts out the stand. But for me, one of the other things that I was really impressed with his performance is the fact that he also got the assist for the first goal. And I talked about McArthur and the fact that he's obviously tried to cross the ball in, it's gone off the far post, but it was actually that nice sort of 1-2 pass in between Townsend and McArthur, which obviously led to that goal in the first place. So in that respect, obviously Townsend got the fantastic goal and was just brilliant offensively. But the fact that he also got assist as well, and I think it's the first time since sort of 2 seasons ago where he got a goal and an assist in the same game. The fact that he's obviously been able to do that was obviously great to see. And like I've said already, obviously his performance was great and the goal was great, but the fact that he sort of topped it off with that assist as well was obviously great to see. And I do certainly think for the goal alone he deserves the 8, but the fact that he combined that with his offensive work, like I've said already, and obviously the assist as well, that was of course great to see. Now, of course, Benteke is now probably a few weeks away from returning to the side, and obviously we're not going to be quite sure what's going to happen, whether McArthur is going to be dropped and Townsend drifts out wide, or whether Benteke comes into the side in the place of Townsend and Townsend drops to the bench. Whatever happens, obviously we might see a change in Townsend's sort of position and performances going forward, but hopefully when Benteke comes back, maybe Townsend can go back to his natural position out wide, because as shown in the game here, he can put tasty deliveries into the box, but also when cutting inside from that right hand side or the left hand side, he obviously can score screamers. So hopefully with Benteke coming back and with us once again getting some more options in the side, hopefully that will not only help the team but obviously help Townsend's individual performances as well. So I'm going to move on now to our final player, and that is of course Wilfried Zaha, who I'm going to give a 7 overall for his performance. Now in terms of Zaha, when you consider he hasn't necessarily scored in the last few games or so, hasn't necessarily been involved as he would have much as he would have liked, you can look at it and go, actually he's in quite a bad run of form, and that's not to say that he's been terrible, it's just the fact that much like quite a few players, he sets quite high standards, so when he isn't necessarily performing, it obviously isn't necessarily terrible, but it's fairly average by his standards, and that's one of the reasons I've given him a 7, in the fact that he wasn't necessarily up to his normal standards, but he was still quite an effective player in the side. Now, one of the words I would use to describe his performance here against Burnley was busy, because that's basically what he'd done. He was sort of running about up top, making life difficult for the Burnley back four. And much like Townsend drifting out to the right hand side, quite often, Zaha found himself drifting out to that left hand side and trying to go one-on-one with defenders, which he often done quite well, and obviously trying to get balls into the box. Now, because we were obviously putting Burnley under quite a lot of pressure, they obviously parked the bus for whenever we were on the attack. Let's say they put as many people into the box as possible, so of course that made it a bit difficult for Zaha to actually get into the box or put balls into the box, because there were just so many players in and around there. But the fact that he was still, busy, and the fact that he was still getting down to that byline, trying to put balls in, as well as obviously trying to just make life difficult for the Burnley back four, that was of course great to see. Now, much like what I said with Meyer, in the fact that he was obviously the architect and involved in most of our good play, obviously most of that good play also came through Wilfried Zaha, and certainly he was involved in most of our, or if not all of our attacking play. So the fact that we've got someone like Meyer, who's obviously playing so well in the midfield, who's obviously linking up the defence to the attack, but the fact that we've also got someone like Zaha on the end of that, who also is making good use of that good attacking play, was obviously great to see as well. Now, much like he has been this season, he's obviously been a constant threat, but like I said in the introduction, he hasn't necessarily scored in the last few games, and he's certainly on a poor run of form by his standards, but the fact that he's still able to maintain that sort of ability to be a constant threat, despite him not necessarily playing that great, that is of course great to see. But like I've said, but the fact that Burnley had so many players in the box, and maybe just a little bit that his finishing was a little bit poor on a few occasions, that of course sort of could play its part as well. Now, going back to his finishing, there were a few fantastic chances sort of in the second half, beginning of the second half, where obviously Townsend and Zaha linking up really well. Balls got thread out to Zaha on that right hand flank, and obviously he's one-on-one with the keeper with just a defender right next to him. And rather than trying to sort of aim it quite accurately, trying to get into one of the corners or away from the goalkeeper, he's tried just to go to go with power just to get it past the goalkeeper, and of course it went up and over. So in that respect, you know, his finishing could have been better, but then if you put that chance aside, all of the other chances he actually had for on goal, he couldn't really do too much with it, mainly because Burnley were just putting so many men behind the ball. But the fact that he actually came up with against an informed Joe Hart also could play its part. So the fact that he's obviously his finishing let him down on a few occasions, but the fact that he also sort of complemented that with the fact that he actually had a few fantastic chances to score. You know, one of them where he curled the ball fantastically into the top corner, another one where he had a chance and Joe Hart made the save. So the fact that his finishing was bad on a few occasions, but then when his finishing was good, he still didn't go in because Joe Hart was playing so well. That of course just goes to show that it wasn't necessarily his day, because he was either missing the chances himself with his poor finishing, or he'd have an absolutely fantastic chance, absolutely putting it into the top corner, fantastic finish, but then Joe Hart stops it with a fantastic save. And like I've said already, he probably could have scored, much like sort of James McArthur, he probably could have scored 2 or 3 goals if Joe Hart wasn't in goal. And that basically just goes to show how good Joe Hart was, because he was the only sort of good Burnley player there was on the day. Because if it wasn't for him, it would have been, you know, maybe even 5-0 because of the amount of chances we had. You know, 29 shots on goal, and we only scored 2 goals. So you're looking at that going. And actually, if Joe Hart wasn't there to make the saves, obviously the game could have been won by a bigger margin. But Wilfried Zaha here, once again, not necessarily one of the better performances from him, you know, considering his high standards he sets, but the fact that he's still able to be a constant threat, albeit with no sort of end product in terms of finishing, but the fact that he's also combined that with some good, you know, attacking bits of play as well, which obviously caused the informed Joe Hart to make saves. The fact that he had that, and he sort of, you know, basically had a sort of a juxtaposition, let's say, in performances, in the fact that he was good at times in terms of, you know, being that constant threat and actually causing the goalkeeper to make saves, but then on the other side he was sort of poor finishing in terms of that chance he had when he was fed through by Townsend. So I do think overall, the fact that he was good in some parts, not so good in the others, but overall was still quite impressive. I do think a 7 overall is a fair result. So I'm now going to move on to the subs. Obviously we made 3 subs in the game. The first was Jeffrey Slupp coming on for McArthur in the 78th minute. Obviously Alexander Sorloth came on later on in the game for Townsend, and Jason Puncheon came on for Meyer once again even later on in the game. Now obviously I'm going to start with the players I'm not really going to give ratings, and that's both Sorloth and Puncheon. And obviously Sorloth came on in about the 87th minute. Because it was quite a late appearance, he was basically just brought on to obviously give Townsend a rest, but also just to be that physical presence up top and just basically hold up the ball and just help us to see the game out. And I do still think, even though he didn't necessarily do too much in the game in terms of being that physical presence, the fact that he still had a few touches on the ball and still had a few flick-ons, that was of course great to see. Now in terms of Jason Puncheon, obviously it's quite rare that he plays for Palace now. Obviously the fact that people like Meyer and Chiarte have come in, but obviously it was an appearance for him, nice to see him come on the pitch. But really, because he was brought on in the 90th minute, he wasn't really brought on to, you know, do anything in the game. He was just brought on to see the game out, and certainly because he was playing slightly more central and slightly more deeper than Meyer was, I personally do think it was sort of just a sort of change in formation just to see the game out and just to give us that bit of sort of solidity, you know, at the back, just to see out the result. Now in terms of Jeffrey Slupp, this is the only sub I'm really going to give a rating, and I'm going to give him a 6 overall. Now of course, he just came on the pitch just after Townsend had netted the second goal for Palace, so of course that's a great time to come on the pitch, in the fact that you've got that confidence, you know, your team's 2-0 up, and obviously you want to see if you can, you know, take advantage of the opposition and maybe get a third. But more, like what I said with a few of the other players, yes, he only had 12 minutes or so, but it was still not enough time to make an impact on the game. Now like I've said, albeit we were obviously in a good mood and we were playing really well and playing with so much confidence, obviously when you bring someone on who can't really make that much impact on the game because it's so late on, obviously you can't really expect him to do much. But the one thing I must say about Jeffrey Slupp is the fact that in the past his sort of crossing hasn't been that great, and he just lost the ball quite a lot when he was trying to dribble forward. In this game here, I thought he dribbled with the ball relatively well. Not great, but relatively well. And I do think, rather than, you know, in the past where rather than putting the cross in, he's obviously looked to just to pass the ball back and someone in the midfield to chip it over. He was actually looking to run to the byline and get crosses in, and that's something I quite liked about his performance. And I do think a 6 is really a fair reflection of that, because he came on at a good time, you know, loads of confidence. And certainly when you compare it to some of his other performances, especially sort of his sub appearances this season, I do think this is up there as one of his best, because I do think, at least, even though he didn't necessarily have that much impact, the fact that he was actively looking to get the ball into the box, that was really what was quite impressive and good for me. Now, in terms of just a small summary of the game, obviously this was a fantastic overall performance, and considering the last few weeks or so where we've had good performances but haven't got the results we needed, it was obviously quite nice for us to finally get what we needed and get what we deserved in what was a good performance combined with a good result and obviously a crucial 3 points. Now, obviously the last few games or so, like I've said, we've been playing well, but we haven't really been getting that full reward. We haven't necessarily, or the game hasn't necessarily reflected the performance of both sides. So the fact that we finally put in a fantastic performance and got something from it, and actually out of our last sort of 4 games or so, I do think this is, or 4 or 5 games, this was certainly one of the best performances, not only because of the result and the fact that we finally got 3 points, but actually I do think just the way we dominated Burnley so much was obviously really quite impressive. Now, of course, Burnley, you know, they were a great side last season, finished 7th, but even though they've had that run and they've played so well this season, it is quite clear that they're struggling to follow up from that high standard they set last season. Now, of course, Europa League could have had its impact there, but the fact that we made them look so way off the pace really just go to show how well we've been playing, because although Burnley haven't been playing that great this season, they're still not a bad side. So the fact that we were able to play so well against them and basically make them look so way off the pace, that was of course really quite impressive. Now, just to go back to the stats in terms of the shots, you know, we had 29 shots on goal and 9 of them on target, and obviously it felt at one point there was quite inevitable that we would, you know, one of them would go in, but obviously in reality, you know, the opposition really didn't get any sniff. So the fact that we had loads of chances, loads on target, and yes, we didn't take all of them, but we obviously scored 2 goals, it just felt that inevitable that eventually something would go in. And it obviously also felt inevitable that because we missed so many chances out of our 29, that maybe the opposition might come back at us and obviously bite us again, because obviously we didn't make the most of our chances. But the fact that in reality they didn't actually, the inevitable didn't happen, and Burnley didn't get or punish us for the chances we missed, and the fact that they really just barely didn't get a sniff. You know, you look back at the stats, we had 29 shots, 9 of them on target. Burnley only had 3 shots and I think 2 on target. So when you look at them stats, it really just goes to show and really highlights, along with the 60% possession, really how dominant we were. Now, my final 2 points, you know, the first one is the fact that this was our 100th Premier League win, which of course is great, and it's obviously, we've been waiting on, you know, 99 for ages, so it was obviously great for us to finally get that 100th win in the Premier League, and also our 200th top flight win. So obviously before the Premier League, there was a league before the Premier League in the top flight, and obviously it's nice to see us actually get that 200th win. And basically, you know, the fact that we've been waiting for it for so long, the fact that we finally got rewarded with a good performance by breaking this record and finally getting to that sort of milestone, that was of course great to see. But my final point really, and this is not necessarily related to the game, but big game on Tuesday night, obviously against Brighton. Obviously we played, that performance was good against Burnley, but this really crucial game against Brighton on Tuesday night. So if we can continue with a fantastic performance like we did against Burnley here, and yes, like we did against Burnley here, if we can sort of put in a performance like that, albeit Brighton are a better side than Burnley are this season, if we can put in such a fantastic performance like this where we keep our defence solid at the back and everyone in the defence does their work, if we have the midfield doing their defensive work, give them cover to their back four, whilst also providing that attack going forward, whilst also our attack being on their best sort of form, if we can combine all of that into a fantastic performance, then hopefully in this big game on Tuesday night we'll be able to get a result. Now, personally for me, I'm a bit sceptical. I'm a bit sort of worried about this game because Brighton have been playing quite well this season. But the performance here against Brighton against Burnley here gives me some hope against Brighton. Now, I do apologise making loads of mistakes here, but like I said, it really, you know, really big derby. Most people probably don't understand what it means in the fact that we have a rivalry with Brighton, but like I said, it's a really big game on Tuesday night. So hopefully, if we can put in a good performance like this, we'll be able to get something from the game. So I'm now going to move on to the Man of the Match award, but before I do that and give you my Man of the Match, and who I thought had a big influence in the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. Now, when you consider in the last sort of few weeks or so, it's actually been quite difficult for me to pick a Man of the Match, mainly because even though we haven't necessarily got the results we deserved, we've actually put in some good performances. Now, considering this game against Burnley, there was a lot of pressure on it. The fact that we managed to get a result, which was great, but the fact that we were able to perform as well as we did, and the fact that we dominated Burnley like we did, was obviously very impressive. And certainly going back to the man of the match, it is obviously quite difficult to pick 4 players and sort of narrow it down to these players overall. But for me, looking at the game and looking at different aspects, our defensive performance, our attacking play, as well as just our general sort of midfield play as well, I've obviously come up with 4 players who I've put on the shortlist, and I'm going to briefly sort of explain why I've done so. So in terms of the 4 players, I've gone with Mamadou Sakho, Max Meyer, James McArthur and Andros Townsend. Now in terms of Sakho, it was a pretty hard decision to put either, or any of the back 4 in here, mainly because they all performed really well. But for me, Sakho, the fact that he had another solid performance at the back, won everything in the air, was very physical, basically making it very difficult for Burnley's strikers, and basically the fact that Burnley only had like 2 shots on goal really gives you sort of a sense of the fact that how well Sakho and Tompkins done well to keep them quiet. But the main thing for me about Sakho's performance is, yes, he was good defensively, as was James Tompkins, as was the rest of the back 4, but the fact that Sakho played the ball out of the back so well, and there were a few times, I'm looking at him in the game and he's literally plucking the ball out of the air, dribbling past players, turning past players. The fact that he's got that calmness as well as the ability to play the ball out from the back is for me why he stood out and why he's on the shortlist. Now in terms of Max Meyer, you've probably already heard in the player ratings, but this guy was absolutely fantastic in the game. And if you look back at the game as a whole and just look at how, obviously how dominant we were, most of that was down to Max Meyer playing so well down the middle. Now obviously whenever our good moments of play, obviously most of it centred around him because he was sort of the anchor, let's say, of most of our attacks. But the fact that he was involved with the first goal, albeit he didn't actually get a touch on it, but the fact that he made that run to make to throw off the 2 defenders and obviously the goalkeeper as well, the fact that he was involved in that whilst also putting in his shift, both offensively, and the fact that he had a few shots, one which was saved by Hart, one which went just wide, and the fact that he was also good on the counter-attack, albeit he didn't always take chances like he did, but he was always looking to give to his teammates. So the fact that he was combining that ability to actually have shots himself, like I've said, 4 saves out of the goalkeeper, as well as when he was going forward on the counter-attack, the fact that he was involved in terms of helping his other teammates, that was of course great to see. And like I've said already, I do think he put in a very good shift and certainly worked hard for the team. And when you consider, obviously Burnley were quite poor in the game, but when you consider we dominated the game so well, you've obviously got to look at the midfield and certainly go to Max as to sort of the explanation as to why we played so well there. Now in terms of James McArthur, over the last sort of few weeks or so I've criticised him because he was being fairly average. He hasn't necessarily been bad this season, he's just sort of been below par. But of course it was great to see him in this game here against Burnley, net his first goal. And as I said, it did look like Max may have got a touch to it, but looking at the replays he didn't. But the fact that McArthur, outside on that right hand side, tried to whip in across to Max, but instead he's whipped in across, it's gone to the far post and rebounded in. So the fact that he got his first goal of the season was of course great, but much like Meyer, I do think his attacking play was fantastic, and if you put the goal aside, he actually had loads of other opportunities to actually score himself. So the fact that he was able to get into some good positions, as did Max, and actually get into these good attacking positions, that was of course great to see. And that's one of the main reasons he's in here above people like Luca, who had a good performance, and someone like Chiarte. It's just the fact that both Meyer and McArthur in that midfield, out of our 4 midfield players, they just were getting into these good positions quite often in the game, and certainly in terms of winning that midfield battle, they were quite crucial. And like I've said already, he hasn't necessarily been that great this season, so the fact that he's now put in one of his better performances of late, you're going to give him a bit of credit for that. Now in terms of our final player, I've gone with Andros Townsend. Now obviously, like I've said already, Sakho his defensive work, Meyer and McArthur for their midfield work and their sort of attacking play. And of course Townsend, much the same in terms of playing in a strike force with Zaha. I certainly do think his performance was great. Now of course I could go on, I could talk about the goal, I could talk about that for ages, and God knows how many times I've actually watched that goal on loop. But of course the goal was fantastic, the fact that that ball over the top from Chiarte, he's controlled it, just outside the area, he's cut inside, had a shot from just outside the box, it's gone top corner, no way that Hart's saving that, he's about a metre away from it, so that was obviously, he got it far away as possible from the goalkeeper, got the direction on it, and that was of course great to see. And when you consider, earlier on in the game he had a shot from similar distance and it went out of the stand, so the fact that he was able to get that one pinpoint in terms of the cutting inside and getting it into the top corner was great. And obviously in terms of the man of the match, when you score as a spectacular goal as that, you're obviously going to be on the shortlist because of that. But actually, aside from the fantastic goal he scored, which is certainly going to be up there with goal of the season, if you put that aside, he actually caused loads of problems for the Burnley back four. And yes, Burnley necessarily haven't really been playing that well this season, but the fact that Townsend actually caused them so many problems was great to see. And much like what I said with Meyer and McArthur, he often found himself, getting into these good positions. And I do think, obviously, your strikers, as they were in this game, they can obviously always get into good positions, but it just goes back to the link-up play from the midfield, including McArthur and Meyer. If it weren't for them playing so well, then maybe someone like Townsend wouldn't have played so well. So of course, I think as a team effort, you've got to give a lot of praise to the team. But like I've said, Townsend, yes, his performance was great, but I do think it's actually, yes, he played great, but actually it's because of how good, the link-up play was in the whole team. So I do think the whole team coming together, playing well, sort of helped all of the players in a sense overall. And, yes, he got the goal as well, but actually he also got an assist, and I think it's his first game since like December 2017 or something like that, since he's actually got a goal and an assist in a game. So of course that's great to see as well. Now, obviously, it's pretty hard for me, going back to the 4 players I've nominated from the list. It's pretty hard for me to pick one of these players when you consider, like I've said, Saka's defensive performance was great. Meyer and McArthur's performance in the midfield, both defensively and offensively, was great. And of course, Andros Townsend, getting a goal, getting an assist, and just causing loads of problems for the Burnley back four. That was, of course, great to see. But for me personally, I do think it was an overall good team performance, and I do think, there are a few players certainly missing out on the shortlist, but for me, I'm going to give it to Max Meyer. So congratulations, Max. You don't get a trophy or certificate, but you do get my sincere congratulations on what was a fantastic performance from you. And, as you heard in the player ratings, giving him a 9 out of 10, that really just sort of highlights how good he was in the game. But the main reason I'm going to give it to him, as opposed to any of the other players on my shortlist, is mainly because of just how well he dominated the game. And, I talked about Burnley not necessarily being that great, being quite poor in their play, but the fact that Meyer in particular just stood out in the fact that he was just dominating the play, carrying the ball from the defence, carrying it forward, dribbling past people, cutting inside and having shots, forcing Joe Hart to make saves, as well as obviously for the goal we scored, the first goal, even though he didn't get a touch in it, the fact that he obviously looked like he was going to get a touch in it, obviously through the defenders and the goalkeeper. So in that sense, he was also involved there. So for me, the fact that he was just involved in so much of our good play helped us to dominate in midfield, as well as just working hard for the team. That's the reason I'm going to give it to Max. But like I've said, notable mentions to obviously Saka, McArthur and Townsend. Like I've said already, Saka, good defensive performance. McArthur, very good and very industrious in the midfield. Great for him to get a goal. And of course, Andros Townsend, always causing problems. And of course, he's got a goal. A fantastic, spectacular goal, and obviously an assist to show for that. But obviously do comment below with your thoughts, whether you do disagree with the 4 players I've nominated. And like I've said, there's obviously going to be a bit of disagreement, because I do think, considering it was just such a great team performance, as well as individual performances as well, I do think maybe a few players would have missed out. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my man of the match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson, Andros Townsend, James McArthur and Max Meyer following the game.
Andros, can you describe what it feels like to score a goal like that?
Obviously it's always nice. We got the one in the first half and it was a bit edgy in the second half. We missed a few chances, and we've seen the script before where we've dominated, we've missed chances and they get one on the counter attack. So to score and kind of finish off the game, I'm happy with, and the 3 points obviously the most important thing.
Is it pleasing to create so many chances though? I think you were close to 30 in the end.
Really? I think we've done that all season. We've created chances. Maybe we've been guilty of not putting the chances away, which was the story again today. But thankfully we did get to get us over the line, get us the 3 points, and hopefully now we have the confidence and we can build and we can start putting away more of the chances that we're creating.
Overall, that was a really strong performance today, wasn't it?
Yeah, of course. I think we've been strong most of this season, even though results have not gone our way and we're towards the bottom of the table. Performances have been very good, and we knew if we kept that up today, that the result would come, and thankfully it did. And we've got a difficult period now where we've got loads of games in a short space of time, and we have to keep going, we have to keep the momentum and keep picking up points.
There'll be a lot of focus on your attacking play today, but that's back-to-back clean sheets in the Premier League.
Yeah, no, the boys at the back have been fantastic. Even the boys at the front, we defend from the front. I think we've done a good job. The whole 11, even the players that came on, we did a good job today defensively, and that clean sheets for all 16, 17 of us in the squad.
James, 2-0 home win today. You must be delighted.
Yeah, I thought we were excellent. One of the best performances I've been involved in. We were outstanding from the first whistle and thoroughly deserved.
29 shots on goal, I think it was in the end. It could have been a massive scoreline.
Yeah, I think if we were further up in the table, I think with confidence of scoring goals, then it would have been a lot more today. Maybe because you're down the bottom of the table, they don't seem to go in, but 2-0 with an amazing performance. We're very pleased in there.
And with your goal, it was actually a great ball in for Max.
If Max doesn't make the run, then it's never ever going in. So it's all credit to him, really.
And when it was 1-0, had all those chances, were a little bit of nerves set in at all?
It didn't look like it. We kept playing the same way. We kept attacking. Obviously, when it's 1-0, there's that fear of if they get one goal, then we throw 3 points away. But kept it a task, and thankfully we get the second with an amazing strike from Andros.
Yeah, it was classic Townsend, wasn't it?
Yeah, some of them don't quite go there, but
yeah, 5 minutes before.
He does it in training a lot as well, where he goes for that top corner, and thankfully he's put it in there.
Now, not long until Tuesday night, Brighton. Looking forward to that one.
Yes, for us, for the fans, for everyone involved at the club, it's a massive game, and it's a chance for us to go there and give the fans an amazing win and keep trying to push up that table.
Max, it was a really good performance today from the team, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. We had a very good game today. We had many chances, and yeah, we played very well. And I think the win is deserved.
And I mean, you nearly got the goal. James McArthur said if you hadn't made that run, then it wouldn't have been a goal.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, I think the one was important for the goal, and yeah, I'm happy for the goal and for the team. I think we deserved it. We deserved it, the win. And when we play like this today, I think we will get some more points in the future.
And Andros Townsend's goal was a special one.
Yeah, it was amazing, unbelievable goal, and he has the very good left foot, and yeah, today he showed.
And for you personally today, would you think it's probably the best game you've played for Palace?
Yeah, I think so. I had a good game today because we played very good and we had much possession, and that's good for me when we have much possession, and yeah, I hope in the next time that I can score.
It was a nice reception for you from the fans when you came off. The fans been good to you so far?
Yeah, I love the fans. They're really good to me, and yeah, I like to play with the team for the fans in the Selhurst Park, and today the vibes was very good.
Has it taken a little bit of time to get used to English football? Is there a difference between German football and English football?
It's much quicker, and I like this. And Germany is sometimes a bit slower, and they play more with the head. But yeah, I like this more when we play quick. And so we had many chances, and I think the crowd was happy today.
I know you played in a defensive role last season, didn't you, for Schalke? Are you enjoying putting that part of your game for Palace as well? So it was a great tackle you made at one point.
Yeah, I like it to play a bit forward, but last season was good for me to play a bit defense. So I learned to tackle, and so I can do it a bit forward, and yeah, I have space for myself, and yeah, I can shoot on the goal, and yeah, I like them more.
And finally, the next game is against Brighton, which I'm sure you've been told are rivals in the Premier League. But I guess you have experience from playing in Schalke. Is it Dortmund were your rivals then?
It was a big rival, yeah. So it was the biggest derby in Germany, Dortmund and Schalke, and yeah, I'm excited for the game on Tuesday, and I hope we can play the same like today, and I hope we can win the game.
How's that? Yeah, well, I agree with him. I'm pretty certain his analysis of the game would have been good. He's a modest man. He's a reasonable man. He wouldn't say his team were better than they were, or we were worse than we were. So let's keep it nice and short. You should. Oh, well, there you are. I thought I would have been very surprised if he said otherwise.
He said also this bizarre first goal.
Well, fun enough, that's not strictly true, because I think if people, when it's the same from the wide free kick, we've known about it for years. If you can hit those wide free kicks in from wider areas, and you can aim between the goalkeeper and the far post, and you can get people flying in across the goalkeeper, it makes it almost impossible for the goalkeeper to save it, because he can't move until the ball's gone past him. So I've known that for many, many years. In fact, one of the most important goals in my career was scored like that in 1976. For any interest, if you've got any interest.
By whom? 76, what you?
His name was scored by Benkmuir and Svensson when Holmesdale Ball Club beat Elfsborg away from home. Any more? Anything else?
First home win, boy, must feel good.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think it's been a long time coming. I think there's been other home games where I've been equally as pleased with the performance. I think we haven't been lucky in our home games. I think the not winning against forget the names of the teams now. Just 1 second. I'm one of my senior moments, but when we didn't beat Arsenal, I thought we were, en route to do so. I thought we were certainly en route to get a good result against Tottenham Hotspur. So I think results have been there in the shadows, but they've just eluded us. But today they didn't, and certainly it would be a very curmudgeonly person who would have actually, if you like, denied Crystal Palace the right to win this game here today, because I thought it was it's not often you get almost 30 attempts on goal and 9 on target, but to be quite frank, there were a good 9 of those 30 off target, which were a damn sight more dangerous, or every bit as dangerous.
Were you getting concerned when you were seeing those chances going
yeah, only because we are where we are in the league, because I don't think the team's performances have got the points total they've merited. So yes, absolutely I was getting concerned, because you really did. Had we had more points, and I think that our performances this year probably have merited more points, then I wouldn't have been quite so concerned. But this was a game where we needed all 3, because we have so few points and we've not been lucky in a lot of our games. So today it was important to get all 3 by hook or by crook. As it turned out, we didn't get them by hook or by crook. We got them because we were clearly the better side from start to finish.
Roy, it's a wonderful goal from Andros to seal it at the end then. It's third of the season, all good strikes. Has he got that in his locker to be doing that more often, more consistently, that kind of strike?
He's got it in his locker, we know that, and we've seen it. And we've seen that shot and that move failed to succeed on quite a few occasions already. The ball's either gone wide or over the crossbar, or the goalkeeper's made a save. So it's no surprise to me when he cuts in there. I expect him to produce that level of shot. Just a question, I suppose, if he can keep it well enough on target, and if he can keep it well enough on target, is the goalkeeper able to make a really good save? Because I remember 2 or 3 situations where Andros' shot in that similar situation has produced excellent saves from the goalkeeper. Today the shot was so good that I don't think Joe Hart could be blamed in any way for letting that one. I think that was a really, really good striker.
Okay. Last one here, please.
Sean talked a lot about how difficult it is for a club like Burnley to stay up and compete year after year after year in the Premier League. Despite finishing 7th, he knew it was going to be a difficult year. How long does it take for a Burnley or a Crystal Palace to get beyond that and become a fixture and not have to every year keep renovating and proving you belong?
It's a very good question, to which there is obviously absolutely no simple answer. I'm not certain that you could put a timescale on it. I think the only way you could ever hope to continue your stay in the Premier League is to continue to keep improving, because we talk about it quite often. I refer back to the time when I came back from abroad to Fulham, and really happy with that time, really proud of that team and the way we work. But when I look sometimes at what we're capable of doing at Crystal Palace today, and I think back, well, were we so much better at Fulham? The answer obviously isn't, but the big difference is it's not that Fulham was so much better than Crystal Palace are today. The difference is the league has become so much better. And there's always been the gulf. I'm not talking about the gulf between the top 3, 4, 5 and the others. That's always been there. That has always been there, and I would defy anybody here to tell me the league where that gulf does not exist, to be frank. Of the top leagues, Spain, no. Italy, no. Germany, no.
Probably
England,
less than
no.
1 year than anywhere.
France, no. Where does that gap not exist between the big money clubs who can get the very, very best players and the rest of us who are doing our best to stay in the league? But in my opinion, the league gets tougher every year. The standard gets higher every year, because even the teams that can't attract the best players attract the best coaches. People like Sean Dyche, who do a wonderful job with the limited facilities. So it doesn't matter whether he's playing Crystal Palace or Manchester United or Manchester City. You won't see Pep or Jose going into a game to play Sean's team thinking this is a piece of cake today. They'll know we've got a game on our hands and we can lose it unless we perform. And to be frank, I don't think there are that many leagues in the world that are quite as competitive as that. Albeit, as I said in the start, the top ones and the others, there is a gap, and there always will be. You know, Paris Saint-Germain will always be up there. Bayern Munich will always be up there. But we've got a few more. We haven't just got one or two. We've got half a dozen.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson, Andros Townsend, James McArthur and Max Meyer had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Burnley. But make sure to come out next week for my post-match review of the game against Brighton. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace!